President Joe Obama just doesn't get enough credit when he's done something that he said he would do. He said that a Biden administration would be a return to what used to be, and he has certainly made good on that. In just the 55 days that he's been president, we've watched gas prices increase on an average of $1.50 more a gallon than when President Donald Trump was in office. Kids are back in cages at the border. There's a surge on the border, which is requiring FEMA to be there, even though Nancy Pelosi is trying to say that was President Trump's fault, despite the fact it was Biden who stopped building the wall and enforcing, the whole laws about entry into the country. Thousands of jobs have been lost because of, the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline and all of the businesses related to that. Yep, things are pretty much getting back to the way they used to be. So, what's next? It's time for the gun grab. By now you are aware of the shooting spree which happened in Atlanta, Georgia at 3 adult massage parlors, the 21-year-old young man who has been arrested and in custody. It's amazing, though, when it first happened, how the media treated this. The Associated Press reported a 21-year-old Georgia man was arrested in the killings of 8 people at 3 massage parlors, many of them women of Asian descent. Police feared the killings could be another hate crime against Asian Americans. And here we go. A representative of Stop Asian Hate tweeted, "This is the latest attack, and it will only exacerbate the fear and pain that the Asian American community continues to endure." Now, this is in response to what has been perceived to be in President Trump and people of, sanity, tracing back the history of this virus and what we're dealing with, tracing it back to its place of origin, Wuhan, China. How dare we point out where it came from? How dare we engage in this xenophobic behavior? And now look what's happened. We now have women of Asian descent who have been killed, and it's all, you guessed it, white supremacists' fault. The mayor of Atlanta tweeted out, "As far as we know in Atlanta, these are legally operating businesses, and we're not going to do victim shaming." Okay. And then hours after all of that hype and that hysteria, we find out that the shooter, under police custody, told them what he did was not racially motivated. Why, in fact, he was a patron of these places, and he was angry about his sex addiction. And they did fail to mention that 2 of the victims were white. So in this cancel culture crazed nation that we find ourselves in, which pulls the plug on Pepe Le Pew because of his treatment of women, when in reality, Pepe Le Pew is a drawing on a sheet of paper. And the so-called females that he's being, overtly aggressive with, are also drawings on a piece of paper. They're not real. They're fiction. But we can have hip-hop and rap music which contains lyrics referring to women as bees and hoes and basically raping them because that's the only reason they exist. That can stay. Pepe's gotta go. We can keep foul-mouthed comedians like Dave Chappelle online and on air giving us his philosophies of life and his philosophies of dealing with women in the most vulgar of terms. That's okay. That can stay. During the height of the pandemic and the shutdowns and the quarantines and the lockdowns, while houses of worship were being mandated to be closed, liquor stores, massage parlors, sex shops, all open for business. Anybody see a problem with our priorities here, that maybe things just a bit askewed? While we have streaming platforms removing books, movies like Gone with the Wind, and content like The Muppet Show for its stereotypical behavior, which I haven't figured out what that is to this day, seeing as how the Muppets are puppets. But yet, streaming services like Pornhub and other porn sites still operating in full capacity. Here's a young man, obviously, according now, we're starting to get, here come the backstories. He was a quiet young man. He kept to himself, yada, yada, yada. We know what we're being set up for here. Obviously, kind of a quiet guy, maybe had a hard time actually engaging with members of the opposite sex, especially when it came to desiring to have a healthy relationship with one. So he took his money and he went and he paid for it. And obviously he's dealing with feelings of guilt, shame, anger, and he has taken it out in the most horrific of ways. And certainly these victims, we understand, these are real people. They have families, people who love them, and we grieve with them. But this was not racially motivated. Repeat, was not racially motivated. But of course, that didn't stop former President Barack Obama from tweeting out that even though we're dealing with this virus for the past year, we have not dealt with the most deadly of viruses in the United States, the gun culture, gun violence. And here it is. Yes, that's really what's going to drive this now. The Obama administration loved to impanel people like then Vice President Joe Biden into looking at ways to restrict your Second Amendment rights anytime there was any type of act of violence that could be tied to a gun. Funny, that didn't happen, though, when a crazed Bernie supporter opened gunfire on Republican senators and congressmen warming up on a softball diamond, getting ready to play a charity softball event. This is going to be now. We can't be trusted. We've got to restrict gun rights and gun law, and here we go. This is the play. This is what they're going to turn this into. We know this now. They're going to have a harder time. It was going to be so much easier for them in the back of their minds if all of these victims had been Asian, because they could have tied this to a hate crime, and then they could have really ramped up. And if they stoked the fire just right, they could actually see people take to the streets and torch the city of Atlanta. But because there's a couple of white victims in there, it just sort of, it's a buzzkill. It just kills the vibe they wanted to get going with a false narrative here. You say, Pastor Marty, you're being rather callous about this. No, I'm being rather fed up about this. We watched our country on fire all summer. And then we find out after the fact, we find out things about the so-called victims that make you realize they weren't quite as, quote, innocent as we were initially led to believe. Now, George Floyd aside, what happened to him was tragic. Yet at the same time, sadly, George Floyd was a known person to local law enforcement. He had quite the history and was not a nice guy and was a very violent individual and had all kinds of issues himself. I am not saying in any way that justifies what happened to him, but this idea that we torched our country, we tore down monuments, we had people, white people, going to these rallies, getting on their knees and apologizing for their, quote, whiteness, fueling this never-ending false narrative that every single white American is racist and the entire American system is racist, and it is all about oppression, which it is not. You know, it's funny. Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice, it was Thurgood Marshall who took on the entire concept of segregation education, and he won. And in the beginning of Thurgood's legal career, he was the guy that was brought in to defend the rights of black people suffering injustices, in particular in the South. But it wasn't just limited to the South, but the South and even in places in the North, which were still segregated and racist. That was what Thurgood Marshall did. But it's amazing when you hear his children speak and his grandchildren talk of him, he didn't hate the United States. He wanted the United States to live up to the promise it made to all of its citizens that all men are created equal. And he believed the best way to achieve that was through the one document that liberals, and especially radical liberals, want to tear up, burn, and destroy: the Constitution. Thurgood Marshall believed that that Constitution was the key that would unlock the shackles that were imprisoning black Americans. That if that Constitution would be made to work for all the people, then black Americans would receive their equality and their full freedom. And he was absolutely right. So what's happened? Well, we've abandoned that approach. We've abandoned that document. And now we have groups like BLM that want that document done away with. They erase their own history. By erasing history and changing everything that they have changed in the cancel culture that has canceled everything that has to do with any type of that they don't agree with, there's no longer a record of the progress that's been made, the oppression that has been stopped, and how it was done. I dare say you have a generation of young black Americans who really don't get, grasp, or even care what Dr. Martin Luther King stood for. It was Martin Luther King who said that he wanted his children to grow up in a country where they weren't judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Yet today, we make everything about the skin color and not the content of the character of the individual. On the one hand, these deaths are absolutely, they're tragic. It's awful. On the other hand, when we live in a society which condones the killing, the butchering of 1.1 million babies a year, a society that says we can have sex without morality, without any type of commitment, guilt, when we so cheapen every aspect of life and we so denigrate, is it any wonder that there are individuals out there who do the things that they do? Because whether society wants to take any ownership or not, it is the crumbling, decaying morality which has produced what just happened. In other words, if those businesses had not been open, this would not have happened. But we'll make this about the guns. We'll make this about white supremacy. We'll put out another false narrative, and we'll think of ways to restrict more of your rights. Because they know they can't completely strip you of gun ownership because of that pesky thing, that Constitution, that Second Amendment, watch how and cumbersome it will be to try to purchase a firearm. To purchase, if you can even find it, ammunition. They will have all the backdoor ways that they will purge you of your Second Amendment right and make you feel guilty in the meantime for even wanting to practice your Second Amendment right. Yes, the Obama years are back through Jobama. Thanks for watching. Make sure you give us a like on this video. Share it to your social media platforms. Check us out on our other media platforms. Make sure you're a subscriber to the channel. It's free. It's absolutely free. Drive my numbers up and let's drive the liberals nuts.